All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So I want to say thank you so much. This is Andre Koen. Thank you for engaging in this conversation with us. I just want to talk a little bit about some of our HR practices and how they need to change, right? So like, what do we need to do to become more effective organizations, particularly when we start thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion? And again, the definitions that we use, you may not use, but the ones that we like are that diversity is our commonalities and our uniqueness, right? And that both of those in concert relationship are important to recognize. That equity is a piece the next step in equality. So making sure that everybody gets access to resources, to education, to the things that they need to accomplish their goals or organization goals, but also making sure that there is equity in that people get it in ways that they can actually use it. Right. And then lastly, this notion of inclusion is the idea that we tear down barriers, artificial barriers that don't help us accomplish our goals so that people can have greater access to the first two things, which is diversity and equity and equality. So just want to point that out as we get into this conversation. So one of the things I've been really noticing is that in a lot of situations, people are, particularly when it comes to HR, are posting and praying. They are posting and praying. And so I have both PARY as well as PRE. So a lot of times when, let me back up. Carter G. Woodson was right. He wrote a book called The Miseducation of the Negro. And one of the premises of this book is something that I have found to oftentimes be very true, right? And particularly institutions of higher education as well as employers oftentimes do this. And what they do is that they take people from their original environment, their community, they educate them in a particular kind of way, they give them certain kinds of things, and then those people leave and never come back, right? And so Carter G. Woodson was right that there oftentimes is not just the Negro, but oftentimes people are don't come back to their communities, right? So this idea of post and pray. So oftentimes what employers do or what recruiters will do is that they will put a post, they'll put a link, they'll put something in social media, they'll do something on a job board, they'll just post something, and then they hope that the right candidate comes because they have posted. And some folks even think that that's their due diligence, right? And then there are the other folks who are posting and preying on those communities, looking to penetrate those markets, to get the good stuff out of those communities, when in both cases, posting and praying actually have the same result, which is that we do not have a greater relationship with the communities that we serve, right? So we actually, we may get that candidate, but to go back to that community, it becomes difficult. And sometimes, okay. So that stuff becomes difficult. So my name is Andre Koen. I want to say thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about how to be more effective in our hiring practices, both as a recruiter, as a manager, supervisor, and how do we kind of work to retain staff, right? And so one of the things that I like for us to kind of think about is when you first, when you're thinking about purchasing something, when you're thinking about getting a service or done, right? How do you do that? Typically, for most of us, we start with word of mouth and then we check and verify, right? So there are certain people that we know I'm not asking them for their opinion. all off the bat, right? Because whatever, I'll leave that there. So we're purposeful about who we go to, and then based on those recommendations, we follow some processes to decide if that's what we want to do or not, right? So someone says, do you know a good faux restaurant? Or pho restaurant? You know who to go to and who not to go to. If you want to find a beautician or a barber, there are certain people you will go to, and then there's others that you won't go to. And the same should be said for how we do our recruitment, right? And so what I find oftentimes is that employers and recruiters, given their volumes, given all sorts of stuff, they get stuck in this process of post and pray. Now, I know some of you are like, well, you have that spelled twice. You have pray on there twice. And we'll talk about that in just a second. First is that a lot of times managers and recruiters, they will post a job and pray for some folks to come, right? I hope that the right person comes to this job, right? They may as well like rub a genie lamp or break some wishbones, right? To get what they're hoping, that perfect candidate. And then there are those who post and then they pray, P-R-E-Y, which is to they're looking to take the best talent out of a community as opposed to investing in that community. But I'm getting ahead of myself, right? And so what we want to do is we want to be a bit more proactive than just posting and praying. We don't want to just hope we get the right candidate, and we don't want to just go in and poach the candidates out of a community without having a relationship. And so when we think about, first of all, where do we get recommendations for the services or the things that we want? We get them from people that we know and trust. We get them from people we have relationships with. And so if we want to avoid this post and pray mentality, then we must adapt a relational attitude with the communities that not only that we serve, but that we want to be in relationships with, so that this becomes a mutually beneficial relationship, that my hiring not only enhances that individual, but enhances the community from which that individual comes out of, right? And so are there shortages in workforce? I would say that there are shortages or lacks of relationships, right? So we know that in 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation was declared, and as a result of that, some other things started to come into play, right? So we know soon after that, the NRA was established. We know soon after that, these things called the Black Codes that were designed to control how black people moved in the South. And we also know at the same time in 1867 that Howard University was established. And so although, people will say, well, there's this shortage, but how many of us know where historically black colleges and universities are? How many of us know how many historically black colleges and universities there are? How many of us know about indigenous or Native American colleges and universities, or Hispanic colleges and universities? Not to mention my sisters in female colleges and universities, right? And so I would submit to you that I don't know that there's necessarily a shortage of individuals in the workforce. I think there's a shortage of relationships with those communities that is mutually beneficial, right? And so we show up to career fairs and job fairs and say, give me your best. But I wonder what would happen if we built relationships with those communities, and so then we knew who to call to say, what's your recommendation on this particular job, or what organization should we be working with, or whatnot. If we have those relationships, people will give us their best recommendations. So I talked a little bit about this idea of exports versus imports. And so if you don't have a mutually beneficial relationship, one of these two things are happening, right? And so I would say that for a nation state to have a good gross national product, that there has to be a balance between the exports and the imports, right? If we use a financial management tool to kind of guide us through that, that's what we come to. And so what I would suggest is, as we think about moving into the space, the post and pray, we talk about the shortages or lack of relationships, that we really get to a point where we start to be thoughtful and critical about what it is that we're doing and how do we build mutually beneficial relationships, not only with the people that we serve, but the people that we're inviting into our organization, right? Because we all come from a context, and that context is either benefited or being denied benefits given our participation. Right. And so when we think about this notion of these shortages, I would suggest that we have a shortage of relationships. So how do we build? How do we close the gap on that shortage of relationship? I would say very simply that we look at historically black colleges and universities. We find out about the other so-called minority programs within our state, within our county, and really start to build relationships with those organizations, because this becomes a natural feeding ground for a natural or organic way in which we can help communities build and grow. Also recognize that as an employer, although you may have a shortage, people who are talented, people who have gifts, people who have tremendous skills have choices. So just like on eBay, make sure that when you make those offers, that you make an offer that is not only competitive, but offers that people will say, well, you're absolutely undeniable as an organization. I can't imagine going anyplace else. So those are some things to kind of think about. We'll talk more about what steps we can take as we move forward in this conversation. My name is Andre Koen. I want to say thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to seeing who you become.